So thank you all for being here. Welcome to those of you who are in the room. We've got an almost full house, Jen, so that's wonderful that you have so much support, as well as we have people online joining us. So thank you all for being here. I'm Professor Carol Campbell. I'm head of Moray House School of Education and Sport. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all. For those of you who are guests visiting us at the university for the first time, welcome to the University of Edinburgh. And we're in the Edinburgh Futures Institute, where Jen and team are based. And it's my absolute delight to welcome you to Professor Jen Ross's inaugural lecture in her honour and in your honour. An inaugural lecture is a very special event. Being promoted to a full professorship is a significant achievement in an academic career, and then one that involves considerable expertise, dedication, and damn hard work. So, as we're about to hear, Dr. Ross, or Professor Ross, has capably demonstrated all of these to her very well-deserved promotion. As head of school, I'm tremendously proud of Jen and her contribution to our school and to the university, and you're going to hear more about that tonight. As a fellow Canadian, and I know you could probably tell that from my accent, dual citizen, I'm also delighted that we have guests from North America and Jen's family here to join us as well. So we'll have a good Canadian, North American, Scottish celebration tonight in honour of you, Professor Ross. And for your titled lecture, What Does It Take to Make New Digital Futures for Education? So before we begin, I'm to remind you that we're not expecting any fire alarms tonight. So if we do hear a fire alarm, it's time to evacuate the building and we'll guide you out to a place of safety. But let's hope that does not happen. There's obviously washrooms outside and there's refreshments, and there will be time to socialise after Jen's lecture tonight. And now for the formal introduction. And yes, Jen, I am going to read every single word of it because you deserve it. Professor Ross was born and grew up in Ontario, Canada. She holds a first degree in humanities with literature from the Open University and a PhD in education from the University of Edinburgh. Professor Ross was a researcher and associate lecturer at the University of Edinburgh from 2006, while undertaking her PhD. She was promoted to lecturer in 2012, becoming a senior lecturer in 2016, and Chair of Digital Culture and Education Futures in 2024. And congratulations. She has been co-director of the Centre for Research in Digital Education since its launch in 2015, and I see many colleagues here tonight. And Jen leads the Cultures and Futures theme. She has held research leadership roles in cultural heritage and co-leading the cultural heritage theme in the college and the digital cultural heritage cluster in the Edinburgh Futures Institute. She has served as director of 2 master's programmes, the MSc in Digital Education and the MSc in Education Futures, which she had a lead role in designing and co-developing. Since 2024, she has been, wait till I get this right, the College of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences Associate Dean of Research Cultures, and she was previously the Deputy Director of Research at Moray House School of Education and Sport. These roles indicate the breadth of Jen's expertise and interests, her commitment to teaching, to research and to leadership capacity, and to make new things happen. Jen doesn't just follow people, she leads and innovates the way along. Her leadership has involved developing something from the ground up, including research groups, new roles and innovative academic programmes. Jen excels in bringing people together and catalysing and growing new areas of activity. Jen's research is located at the intersections of digital culture, education and learning, and critical futures. She examines how digital technologies affect ideas, practices and visions of the future in higher education and in the cultural heritage and learning sector. She has done a range of work with museums and galleries and all sorts of various connections, and she's shown what collaborative, imaginative digital technologies and practices can do, and the potential for learning communities and pedagogies. Her research has always interrogated the way digital technologies shape and are shaped by issues of power, audience, surveillance, trust, and openness. So this balance of imagination and critical engagement has informed her work. That influence has been seen throughout her work and her collaborations and her impact. Her 2017 article and 2023 book, Developing Speculative Methods in Education and Research, are well known, and HRC funded projects on topics including digital museum engagement and evaluation and AI in education. Innovative forms of futures-oriented public engagement and research, including manifestos for teaching online and work on higher education futures. Highly cited works in key journals in the area. Leadership in international networks such as Europa and higher education after surveillance. Long-standing relationships and collaborations and knowledge exchange here in Scotland, including Scotland's Futures and the Scottish Parliament, but also around the world, and work with national galleries and museums. And her online hybrid and fusion learning through her work with the master's programmes that I mentioned, and e-learning and MOOCs and multiple other connections. Jen does have a life beyond her work. Jen has been singing. Now, I take this on good authority, but Jen tells me the amazing Edinburgh-based choir for more than 2 decades. But they keep the amazingness to themselves because they don't perform publicly, but they enjoy their time together. Jen's also a keen gardener, although she tells me that's not an area she excels in so much. But she enjoys eating her produce and sharing in making work. And a new one for me, Jen enjoys cli-fi, climate fiction, so she is an avid reader. And she enjoys spending time with family and with friends, including tonight, including those of us here in Scotland and in Canada and in the USA. And she says she's lucky to have all her family with her. So many of Jen's wonderful friends and family are here today, in person and online, including Jen's spouse, father, sister and brother-in-law, and I know that there are other members of the family online or will be watching the videos. If you're a member of Jen's family, can you just give a wave so we can welcome you? Welcome, welcome, welcome. And now I've done the formalities, and this is a formal occasion. The inaugural lecture is a special occasion, but it's a time to celebrate. You know, we have some of our challenges in higher education at the moment, but tonight is a night to celebrate, and to celebrate Professor Ross and all of your achievements in the community that you're part of. So can we just give a big celebration to Jen before she gets started?
Okay, sound. Can I just double check that everyone online can hear as well? Let me know if there's any issues and we can stop. Right. So this is an amazing day for me, and I am exceptionally happy that you're all here in person and online. But I can't really say that much about that because I'll get emotional, and that's not a good look for the start. Maybe we'll do that later on. So I want to begin just by saying that this is a talk in 3 parts. And also to note that I really like birds. So there's a lot of birds in this presentation, and that is the only reason why, because I like them. So part 1, looking back. I've always felt at home with computers. My dad was someone who designed and made software. So from the time I was about 7 or 8, there was always some kind of Apple Mac or other in our house. And when I was about 10, I got to be a guinea pig on a pilot course to learn how to touch type at a local college with my best friend, thanks to her dad. So by the time I was like an early teenager, I was pretty much ready for the digital future that was coming our way with the internet, even though that was only still a few years away. I've always felt at home with words. I was a choir kid and a drama kid, but most of all, I was a reading kid. At least a couple of Saturday mornings a month were spent at the local library picking out the next stack of books. And I read everything, including sci-fi and fantasy and things that introduced the idea that there could be whole new worlds through books. When I was about 15, I started writing poetry, inspired by my favorite English teacher, who taught me to be interested in what words do and how they sound, and like why it might matter if the coat is yellow or red. The home computer became a place where I would, oh, can't look at those people over there, where I would sort of work my words over and over again and save them and share them. So I accidentally moved to Edinburgh when I was halfway through a degree at McGill University in Montreal. And I eventually was able to finish my degree at the Open University in the UK, as Carol has said. And I need to shout out to the Open University and the really amazing boxes that they used to send their learning materials in. I mean, urgent educational material. I meant to come here. I just didn't mean to stay. And the reason for that is a story for definitely another day, but then as now is just over there. Oh yeah. So I spent a couple of years doing sort of interesting and less interesting admin jobs. And in our spare time, we taught ourselves how to make websites. This was at a point where the dot-com bubble was more or less bursting, but there was still a lot of energy and interest, and people who were computer literate and had some HTML skills and some WYSIWYG software, if anyone remembers that, could be really useful to academic departments and to artists and to small businesses who are trying to figure out what it meant to have an online presence. So that's what we did. It was my admin skills and a tip from a friend that got me my first job at the University of Edinburgh, but my web skills then also opened the door to a learning technology role. And these roles and just becoming part of the university in that way really helped me see all of the really amazing things that can happen in a place like this, all the different things and really amazing things. And I'm still really grateful to the people who showed me what that was and what it was about, including Gwyneth Lloyd, John Davis, Fiona Mackay, and Andy Pride. So in 2004, a very intriguing message came around the university's email. And it was an invitation to apply to be a member on the pilot instance of the very first course on an online master's program that some people were developing. And I wasn't really planning to do any more studying, and I definitely didn't know if e-learning was going to be my thing, but it would look kind of interesting and it was relevant to my job and it was free. So I applied. I didn't set out to be an academic or a teacher or an educational researcher. I think that I was good at a bunch of things that have been very helpful in this career, but I think my best talent is actually knowing when I'm in a good place and figuring out how to stay there as long as possible and do absolutely everything that I can. So you can picture a younger me, very perky, a little bit overwhelmed, starting to realize that there really was some common ground for the weird combination of stuff that I knew and stuff that I was into, and it was awesome. And I would say that that awesomeness was really pervasive at that time, actually. It was the early to mid 2000s, and designers and literature graduates and sociologists and artists and cultural studies people and education researchers were converging on the web as a place where there were possibilities for new forms of knowledge production and new forms of learning. And then, as now, I would say, the word digital covered a really huge range of things, and you could get actually quite a bit of support for pretty exploratory digital innovation if it held potential for innovation of learning, teaching, and assessment. You could get time, you could get resource, you could get amazing people to help you spin up or adapt virtual spaces, and there were just so many choices to experiment with. Social bookmarking, microblogging, hypertext essays, virtual worlds, game-based learning. It was all happening, and it really felt fresh. And then, as now, the people doing this work were completely outstanding. I have been incredibly lucky to have worked with just the most amazing, creative, kind, smart people over the last 20 years. And those people are based in lots of places in this university, in other universities, in Scotland and the UK and around the world. But the foundation for all of those connections and projects and opportunities has been my academic home in the Centre for Research in Digital Education, as it is now called. Led by the incomparable Professor Shan Bain. And yeah, I can't really say any more about that either. Otherwise, I will get emotional and we'll have to stop the talk. But I'll just say to everyone who's here, who's been involved, that it's been really great. And I thank you very, very much. But I think this is also possibly a time to say, for what it's worth, that I stand in solidarity with everyone working in universities right now, including this one, that are struggling to value and protect what is important. We'll move on. But I see the work that's happening, and I really, really value and appreciate it. So, back to the past. We were supported to do a lot of this work by really strong leadership vision and forward-thinking policies and funding. And this was the environment that I was lucky enough to be in as I started working at the university. And it has shaped what I do now and what I still think is really possible. This graduation ceremony from 2013 is one of my favorite examples of the kinds of things we were able to do at that time. It is an example of the way that you can mobilize people and technology, time and energy towards something that's really meaningful and imaginative. And yeah, if you can't really parse what's going on in this picture, essentially it's a two-way live stream between McEwan Hall in Edinburgh and Second Life, which was a virtual world that we were using quite a bit at that time. So the people in Second Life, represented by their avatars, could see the people in McEwan Hall, and people in McEwan Hall could see all of the avatars up on the screen, and it was a virtual graduation ceremony, and it was really cool. So this environment made a lot of space to experiment, but also really to ask the kinds of questions that literary scholars and sociologists and designers and psychologists will ask if left to our own devices for more than a minute or two. We were interested in all kinds of things about anonymity, about identity, about the visual realities of virtual spaces. I was really interested in the educational implications of the relationship between like emerging forms of personal writing that we were starting to see on the web, blogs and social media in its earliest stages, and perceptions of audience, and how we might think about that in the context of online reflective practices in higher education. So that led to my PhD research and led me to theorize how reflective writing for assessment could be understood through the metaphor of the mask. This was amazingly fun work to do. I loved interviewing people. I loved working with visual data. I loved analyzing and trying to understand the relationship between digital culture and education. And I still absolutely love all of that stuff. So it sort of started here, but it hasn't ended. And while I was doing that part-time PhD, I was also learning what kind of teacher that I would become. And I think that that has been really, really shaped by the mode of teaching that I began with. So I still would say that I am first and foremost an online teacher. And the work that I was able to do in developing my teaching was based in the MSc in e-learning, which is now the MSc in digital education. And yeah, the last 20 years of this program has brought many hundreds of people through who have become colleagues and friends and collaborators, but also many, many more who are just doing the most amazing work around the world, developing and shaping strategy and policy and all kinds of important realities for digital education in their contexts. And I think all of that good stuff made us feel like online and digital education was really a space of possibility. The MSc in digital education was a really rich source of insights and questions for us and helped us think about and also make kinds of digital spaces and practices that we thought were important to try to make and explore. And I think you can see this kind of optimism in our manifesto for teaching online, which we first wrote and published in 2011, and then recreated in 2016, and then it became a book in 2020. And I know the text is too small to read, but I think the important thing to point out here is that all of those iterations of that manifesto had at their core the idea that online and distance learning should not be seen as a deficit, but as a positive principle for education and learning. And this is, I would say, a harder position to sustain right now, not because there's not still really amazing stuff happening in digital spaces, not because the program isn't still really amazing, not because there's not all this incredible energy still happening, but because things have sort of shifted in the technological landscape that we're inhabiting. And it is harder to find ways through that and to keep on with these kinds of really positive, optimistic ideas. But as it's sort of in my nature to do so, I still am quite hopeful about all of that. So in the early 2010s, we had the opportunity to be involved in what had then became a really important critical space of experimentation for the Center for Research in Digital Education with the arrival of, probably for me, the first time I had really seen a really significant hype cycle in education technology. And this was the massive open online course, or MOOC, which was going to absolutely destroy or revolutionize the university, take your pick. It was going to be a complete revolution, and it was extremely interesting to see how these transformation claims were going hand in hand with really significant financial investments that were underpinning this idea of certain kinds of predictions and promises that were being made about what the MOOC was, what it was going to do. So these were really interesting spaces. The MOOC was this kind of idea that you could open up higher education to thousands of people at a time, and it could be free and it could be open, and it could deal with the issues of scale that higher education was facing and still is facing. But they were spaces of discomfort and excitement because of that relationship of promises, predictions, investments, and the sense that when those kinds of promises are made by certain people, investment of resource and effort follows. And so I did become quite interested at that time in how promises and predictions shape what's seen as sort of likely or desirable or possible in educational spaces. But I sort of filed that thought away because there was a lot going on at that time. And you can see also that these kinds of promises about what the MOOC was going to do and how it was going to change education were accompanied by policy changes as well, and promises that were being made about how the education system itself was going to change. And the work that was going on at the time and now to understand this kind of dynamic, I think, is some of the most important work that we have in digital education right now. So something that I learned from doing this, learned a few things. One thing that I learned is there are questions that you can only really answer by getting into the middle of something and trying something and figuring it out from the inside. if you're in these spaces where new kinds of things are happening, you can ask different kinds of questions than you can ask as an outsider. So that's what we did. We made a MOOC. It was one of the University of Edinburgh's first 6 MOOCs. It was called E-Learning in Digital Cultures. We were dissatisfied with the limitations of the platform that was offered to us to do this. So we used the platform, but then we tried to put this MOOC everywhere. It was mayhem, but in the best possible way, really fascinating. And because the University of Edinburgh was really interested in MOOCs, and those who were around at that time will nod and agree with me that this was definitely a thing, we were able to help the university develop its online and open education strategy and offerings through these experiments and the kinds of things that we were doing. And okay, so MOOCs didn't, destroy the university or completely revolutionize everything, but there are now about 80 online short courses here at this university. And I think they're really quite an established part of the university's education and outreach program. And so it's the kind of thing that actually matters and can make a difference. And another thing that I learned is that if you're doing this stuff as a bit of an insider, you can open doors to other kinds of partnerships beyond the university. So as a result of the work that we did with MOOCs, we were able to work with the World Bank Education Group on their first set of MOOCs, which was very interesting. I was based in the Scottish Parliament in the Scotland's Futures Forum for about 6 months doing work on open and online education. And all of that work and those partnerships, I would say, sent me on a kind of trajectory of curiosity and ongoing engagement with the ideas and meanings of openness. And that has really informed my work all this time, in the higher education sector, but also in the cultural heritage sector. And another thing that I learned at this time from doing this work on MOOCs is that sometimes it's the really small but extremely experimental research projects that can open up the biggest possibilities and ideas in our field. And this project that I'm about to show you had a long title, and I cannot ever remember what it is, and I didn't look it up for the purposes of this lecture. We just called it TeacherBot. We really wanted to figure out what it meant to be a teacher effectively at scale, the kind of scale we were seeing in the MOOCs. And Shan led this project and put together a team which included the people who had made the EDC MOOC and also colleagues in information services and in design informatics. It was an opportunity to test out some form of automation. So for people who are younger in the audience and online, this was before generative AI. So we built an automated bot that would operate in the social media space, Twitter, not called Twitter anymore. And the way it worked was that if a participant in the MOOC tweeted something about the MOOC and used a particular hashtag, then if there was an appropriate keyword in the MOOC tweet, then the TeacherBot would respond. But the TeacherBot's responses were all written by us in advance. So some interesting things happened as a result of that. And the participants got really into it, and it was pretty fascinating. And there has been some great writing done on this experiment, including a really important piece of work by Shan and also work by others who were part of the MOOC, who were participants in the MOOC, about what it means to bring a bot into a classroom, which, we really care about knowing a lot about this now, but it was good to know about it then too. And it was, really interesting. But for me, the most important thing from this experience was what happened when we turned the TeacherBot on, and it had a massive glitch. So we had not caught this in testing, but what happened was when we turned it on live, it started to tweet the same thing over and over and over again, probably like 200 or 300 times in the first couple of hours that this thing was live. And unfortunately, the choice of automated tweet that it sent was also somewhat menacing. Anyway, if you're a human. So this was from Catherine Hale's work on post-humanism, where she wrote about signaling the end of a certain conception of the human, which was, sort of unfortunate. In addition to the thing that happened, it was also the content of what happened that was interesting. So we didn't want this. We were worried about the impact that it would have, and we fixed it as soon as we possibly could. But actually, it was very interesting. So it did turn out to have been a problem in the sense that the Twitter bot dwarfed the participation in the Twitter space compared to all the other participants combined, actually. And that was partly because of that glitch at the start. And once it was running, it worked really well and it was really interesting. But this thing that happened at the beginning actually helped us think in a different way about this question of attention, of effective teaching at scale, of what it takes to actually get noticed in a class of thousands. Turns out if you just start tweeting about the end of humanity, you're good to go. And I've written about this a few times since because I find this idea of the glitch and the ideas that it opens up so interesting. And one of the pieces that I wrote was with the really brilliant researcher Sean Bowden, which you can look up if you want to read. But in truth, I've always really liked this kind of thing. In my PhD, thought about it in the context of a kind of Foucauldian lens of power and the idea that things go wrong in the arrangements of power, and that is what allows new stuff to happen. And this is really important because it means, as the amazing late Canadian writer Leonard Cohen has said, that there's a crack in everything, and that is how the light gets in. And this way of understanding what the glitch is and what it does has shaped my thinking about all kinds of things since then. And I think, essentially, in putting this talk together and thinking about what I think about glitches, is that they invite us to experience what we want and what we're trying to do as one kind of future, but it's not the only future. And other kinds of futures might just get in when stuff cracks, when glitches happen, when things break. So the other thing that was important about the TeacherBot project is that it introduced us to the idea of design thinking, which was brought to us by our colleagues from design informatics and from Chris Speed in particular. Chris became part of the art casting bid that I wrote soon after that. And I started to think at that time about how we could be thinking about design fictions, these really imaginative forms of thinking about the future through design in digital education spaces. And this was where the idea of speculative methods really started for me. This was a presentation that I gave in 2014 to the digital education group, and I cited Mike Michaels, who's a science technology studies scholar who writes about speculative approaches in all kinds of interesting contexts. And he wrote about the sort of alien relations you might be able to bring together if you're trying not to engage in solution seeking, but to enact inventive problem making. I was like, I like this. So I want to say something about the art casting project, but I have to go back for a second to say how it is that I ended up doing a project like that, which was very much a museum and gallery project, as opposed to the more higher education focused projects that I'd been doing elsewhere. So I started doing research with museums and galleries back in 2007 as a researcher on a project called the National Museums Online Learning Project, which was an absolutely fascinating glimpse into how people in museums and galleries were thinking about digital and the stuff that was happening at that time. This quote from an interview just is a little glimpse of the kinds of qualitative data that we got in addition to evaluating the spaces. The spaces are long gone, but the qualitative data remains amazing. So this was an interviewee saying that their senior colleague really couldn't get over all the photographs that had been taken in galleries on phones and uploaded and stuff, but it's out there and people are doing it. This was in 2008-ish. Oh yeah, what did he think about that, we said. Well, I think he's still in shock. Was he? A bad shock or a good shock? Bad. That sense at that time that there were things going on that were going to need some serious thought and exploration was really pretty prevalent at that time, and it is still really prevalent, and we'll go on to talk about it in a few minutes. But we went on after that project to co-lead an event series called Digital Futures for Cultural Heritage Education in Scotland in 2011, and the partner for that project was the National Galleries of Scotland. And that was the first of many, many projects and collaborations with NGS over the years, and also opened up other relationships and networks in the other national museums in Edinburgh and more broadly as well, which has been an absolute highlight of the career that I've had. And the people at NGS are especially amazing at asking really great questions about digital stuff and what it means to be a trusted institution in the context of really big shifts in what's going on in digital and the web. So that's how it happened. And the art casting project was experimenting with imaginative ways of evaluating engagement in the context of National Galleries of Scotland and Tate's Artist Rooms on Tour program. And I'll probably say a little about that in a few minutes, but it in turn led to some other projects and collaborations over the years since, including most recently a really brilliant, I'm just going to say it's fantastic, piece of work called Infrastructure Futures for Digital Cultural Heritage, which was put together and made by me and by Phil Scheel and Melissa Terrace and Kate Schofield. And it was a really interesting piece of futures work in the context of museum and gallery infrastructure. It also allowed me to be involved in setting up the Digital Cultural Heritage Research Network in 2016, which in turn led to being involved in, as Carol really kindly said, the Digital Cultural Heritage Cluster in the Edinburgh Futures Institute and the College of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences research theme on cultural heritage, and Una Europa and some other things as well. And I am continually amazed and delighted by the amazing work that goes on amongst this really interdisciplinary group of researchers in our university and beyond. So, in addition to the substantive question that the art casting project was answering, it was also an example of kind of wading into the middle of a thorny problem. And in the case of that project, it was about try to understand how visitors are impacted by their engagement with art and how we could use technology in less obvious ways to try to explore that thorny problem. So in that sense, the art casting project connected to the TeacherBot project that I talked about a minute ago and to other things that I've done since. And the line of connection is the use of speculative approaches to try to open up different kinds of futures and keep those futures moving. And I think for me, this is about not trying to rush and solve a problem using technology or about technology, but try to imagine different configurations of the future that the problem might afford us. So I wrote about speculative methods first in an article in 2017 in Learning, Media and Technology, and continued to build on that in my book in 2023 called Digital Futures for Learning. And I have found this to be an exceptionally useful way to think through lots of the kinds of questions that I'm really interested in. And it turns out that other people are really interested in them as well. And speculative methods have become really important in the field of digital education and elsewhere as well. And that work has kind of converged. It's not like, but I am really, really proud of the part that I have played in building that way of thinking in our field of digital education, and also incredibly proud and grateful for all of the amazing doctoral students and master students and others who have worked with me and deepened my own understanding and appreciation of these methods over the years. So I absolutely could geek out about methods for the next 20 minutes or half an hour, how long I have left, but I'm not going to do that, but I could. Instead of doing that, I am going to spend a couple of minutes talking to you about the stories of two objects from the future. And these are fragments from research projects that show how speculative methods can help uncover possibilities and issues in really interesting ways. And also, I think, help us think more expansively about the work that we're trying to do. So the first of these is an art cast from the art casting project that is still traveling. So the art casting project was an experiment back in 2015 and 16 in what might happen if galleries approached evaluation differently. So instead of asking the kinds of questions that you often do get asked if you go to a gallery exhibition, which is like, what did you like in this thing, or what did you learn? We decided it would be interesting to ask a different question. And the question that we asked people is, where would you send this artwork? And we asked people where they would send this artwork, not only in space, but also in time. And lots of people sent their artworks to the past for a particular reason, or to the present, but some people also sent them to the future, like in this example here. So we built a prototype app that was allowing people in these exhibitions, and this was the Robert Mapplethorpe Magic in the Muse exhibition at the Bose Museum in County Durham in 2015 and 16 that is represented in this image here. And this particular art cast, as we called them, was sent by a visitor to the Bose Museum in February 2016 to November 2026 in Vancouver. They wanted it to arrive in Vancouver this year because they thought that it would give some inspiration to them to go to Vancouver and learn to become their own person. And I hope they made it. The art casting project was really interesting in all kinds of ways, and it opened up a lot of different questions for us. And one of the things that has been most important for me in thinking about what I learned from that project was this idea of the role of the museum and the gallery in protecting, in looking after, in having authority in relation to not only the physical things that they have in their museums and galleries, but also the digital things. And what happens when those relationships of authority and maybe trust and other things can become fragmented as more and more things move into spaces that are not controlled by the museums or the galleries themselves. This is the quote that I showed earlier from 2009 about someone's colleague not being able to get over all the stuff that had been uploaded on the web. And that was fraught at that time. And I think it's still quite fraught, especially with the advent of AI, putting more and more things into question about the authenticity of stuff and how we should understand trust in relation to all of these different kinds of spaces. But I also have always understood and thought about this in relation to hospitality, not in the kind of like friendly, easy way that we often think about hospitality, but in the more complex way that Derrida has talked about, where the host is essentially a hostage to the stranger, because they don't know when the stranger is going to turn up, or if they will turn up, or who they'll be, or what they'll do. And this does create really complex relationships for people working in these kinds of institutions. I loved this article from 2009 by Edith Doran about multiculturalism in the Children's Museum. And she described this as hospitality's infinite obligation to the unknowable other, which I think is also kind of a good description of a lot of things, including doing futures work. But she was talking specifically about how you become a host in these kinds of spaces when you do not know who's coming through the door, and you can't know and you shouldn't know. And this becomes even more complicated when that relation of hosting gets out there into the internet, when stuff might be happening that you had nothing to do with, right? Like if you're working in the museum and the gallery as a learning person or whatever, this thing is escaped, it's gone, it's doing something else that you didn't know about. And this relationship of hospitality as something that's kind of maybe temporarily out of joint, spatially out of joint, was something we explored in the art casting project, and I think we still can learn a lot from. Yeah, a lot. So I wrote about this in 2018, and I said that actually I thought one of the main things here was the way that users and others might continue to re-encounter and reuse digital objects in a future that no longer includes the original exhibition or the original collection. And the art casting project and that art cast that I showed you at the start of this bit was a really interesting example of that, right? Because, well, the app doesn't exist anymore, but if it did, that thing would still be moving and someone might encounter it in Vancouver, and that's nothing to do now with the Bose Museum or with Artist Rooms on Tour, and that is interesting to me. My second object from the future is a placard from a student protest in Scotland in the year 2074. Thanks, Sarah. The Towards Embedding Responsible AI in the School System project was funded in 2024 to develop a picture of what responsible AI, generative AI particularly, could look like within secondary school education. And part of what we did as part of this project was to develop and test some speculative and participatory methods with young people in schools in Edinburgh and in Norwich, and use those to produce recommendations for policymakers and education leaders about what young people consider important in shaping AI futures. It was an amazing project, an amazing team. And And you can read more about it at the link there. And this placard was made as part of a workshop where the young people in a workshop in Edinburgh were invited to make a demands for big tech protest. So this is them imagining it was 2074 and what they thought would be going on with AI at that time and what kind of protests might be needed. So this placard is about the relationship between humans and AIs, and it centers around this idea of effort and hard work and whose effort and whose hard work is valued and whose is important. And so this young person wrote about the importance of working for success and not having it handed to us on a silver platter. And then they quote Camus' 1942 essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, which was absolutely not part of the workshop at all. It was obviously something they had been like reading or thinking about on their own. But anyway, this idea that the struggle itself is what matters educationally is both interesting that young people think that, and actually that came up quite a bit in the project. It's also complicated because a lot of the promises that are currently being made about AI is that they are going to make our lives so much easier and everything's going to become more efficient and we won't have to work so hard. And so this relationship between what young people think might be the potential of AI to perhaps support more equitable experiences of effort. So they were quite interested in whether we could level the playing field so that everyone could make effort in ways that was meaningful and good and not negative. But this is a really different scenario from what's being sort of talked about and promised in relation to AI at this moment in time. And so probably responsible AI and responsible generative AI needs us, because we like it as well sometimes as well, this dream of efficiency, this imagination that we could do everything more easily or less time or whatever. We need to teach ourselves and we need to teach each other how to live with and embrace effort for its own sake, because it's really important in the context of an AI future that might or might not look like what's being proposed here. And I think that what this is telling us is that that dream of efficiency is one that we really need to be thinking critically about and doing something different with. Oh yes, and we wrote about this. So the title of this talk was a question. The question was, what does it take to make new digital futures for education? And one important answer to that question, I think, is that it takes detaching ourselves from some of our more persistent dreams. The dream of efficiency is kind of an easy one because lots of us already understand that that's not really a very good dream and that it's sort of being sold to us in a way that isn't particularly helpful. But there are other dreams that I think we are more attached to that we maybe need to become less attached to. And so I want to give a couple of examples of those kinds of dreams that are a bit thornier for us to deal with. The first one is a dream of tech abundance. I showed this photograph a while ago, and I said that it was one of my favorite examples of how we could do something really amazing. If you have time, if you have tech, if you have people, if you have energy, you can do things that are really imaginative and meaningful. And it was absolutely fantastic. But all of those resources of time and energy and tech and resources are in short supply. And the world that we are teaching and learning in now is not the place that it was. But in truth, for lots and lots of students and teachers and other people, the world was never that place. This is some images from Second Life, which was a virtual world that we did a lot of really important and interesting pedagogical work in as part of the MSc in e-learning and digital education in the 2000s and early 2010s. And it was so computationally intensive to run this thing on people's computers that we had a second strand of activities for people who didn't have the bandwidth or the hardware to be able to access the tutorials and stuff that we were running in Second Life. And that was at a time when most of the students on our program were based in the UK and Europe, which isn't the case now. And so they had like the best tech that was available at the time, and it still wasn't good enough for some of the stuff that we were trying to do at that time. And I think we were hopeful that the promises of bridging the digital divide and that more abundant tech could come to everybody was something that we were going to see quite soon. So we could continue to do this work in the hope that it would be something for everybody to be able to access soon. And these promises of abundance, the tech abundance, were like everywhere at that time, right? Maybe every child will have their own laptop. Maybe we'll have online education for everyone. Maybe all the villages will be wired up, and maybe we'll have a digital fix for like everything that's broken. And those promises about abundance and tech abundance are still being made and pursued, massively pursued 20 years later, even though we know that it brings realities of e-waste and exploitation, of digital colonialism and ecological crisis. And that actually, we probably need less tech or very differently configured tech rather than more, which is kind of disappointing for me, as you can imagine, because I'm a computer person. But thankfully, there are people doing amazing, creative, amazing work to try to think through this different kind of future that doesn't rely on tech abundance in the same kind of way. This is work from the field of digital humanities that coined the phrase minimal computing to talk about doing less with less. And so the initial question that this was framed around was the question of what do we need? And since then, there's some more questions added to that. What do we have? What must we prioritize? And what are we willing to give up? And these are not the kinds of dreams that we were used to in the early 2000s when we started doing this work. This wasn't the stuff we were asking ourselves at that time. But now there are lots of people doing work around, for example, improvisation. So Nicholas Ruiz and Javi Tejera and colleagues have done work around rebusque, which is about achieving something desired in highly constrained contexts through creative strategies. People are doing work on the idea of digital education degrowth. So Neil Selwyn has argued that edtech should be seen as a problem and a source of harm, not as a solution for problems that we have in education. And that we should be asking what we should get rid of and what we can sustain. We're in this funny moment where like a lot of tech stuff is a bit depressing. Platformization, we've got AI slop, we've got the devaluing of teachers, we've got a socio-political landscape of post-truth that's showing itself to be much worse than we feared. But there are people doing work around tech principles of open source software and frameworks, local network infrastructures, community asset-based approaches, and doing less with less. And these are principles around which people are building new dreams, and we can learn from this work that's gone before and build something new from that. And speculative methods can really be interesting and helpful for us in doing that kind of work as well. This is a tarot card from a project on higher education futures that Shan Bain, Michael Gallagher, and I did a few years ago. And one of our tarot card scenarios was about extinction-era universities where climate disaster is well underway. University teaching is transformed into mass public survival education and conducted through open education networks and local learning collectives. This is one of the 8 scenarios that we work with all the time now in workshops with education leaders and teachers and others. And it is generative for some really important conversations about what kinds of futures we might be looking towards in higher education. We also had a scenario in our Infrastructure Futures for Digital Cultural Heritage project that looked at prioritizing environmental sustainability through digital infrastructure, which would not be available all the time. It would have a minimalist interface. It would show you how much energy you were going to use if you searched for something. It would have low bandwidth, and you might have to wait before you got whatever it was you were searching for. This was actually a very controversial scenario. We're writing about that now and trying to think through why people found this so, dramatic. It is interesting. So the second dream is the dream of access. This set of photographs is taken here in this building, the Edinburgh Futures Institute. The top right photo is one of the really amazing ceiling mics that we don't have in this room, but are in a lot of the classrooms in this building. Well, we do have one. Thanks, Kate. Yep, we've got one over there. The other 2 photographs show some of what's on this screen here, this table here at the teaching desks. And these rooms, this space in the Edinburgh Futures Institute was designed to support really innovative forms of hybrid learning, where students can be physically present in the building, but also can be available online, and that all of those people can study and learn together. And when this tech works, which is, I mean, it's quite complicated, it has its moments, but when it works, it actually does feel like everyone's together, and it has generated some really meaningful opportunities and experiences for students on the MSc in Education Futures, for example, where people have been able to collaborate in ways that simply wouldn't have happened before, because some people would not have come to the University of Edinburgh in person to study an in-person degree for a year. And we need those people and those voices in this conversation. And I do think that this kind of tech setup points the way, and the things we were doing with it points the way to some really productive and meaningful possibilities for the future of higher education, and stuff we should really be continuing to think about. However, this arrangement of tech in these spaces also definitely is intensifying some really unhelpful cultures of visibility, monitoring, and surveillance in education, and connecting up with some other things that are happening in the wider web and in all kinds of different places as well. I've always been really, really interested in surveillance, and visibility, and issues of trust, and you can see that in the Manifesto for Teaching Online, in work that Hamish McLeod and I did. And with Amy Collier, I set up an international network called Higher Education After Surveillance, which in turn led to a bunch of good collaborations and projects, including a 2020 project called Telling Data Stories with Amy Collier, with Dr. Jane McKee, and with Professor Anna Wilson. Anna led the development of a participatory speculative fiction method, which we use to invite anonymous stories about possible futures for surveillance in the university. And we got some amazing stories back. And we've written about this loads and loads over the last few years. So again, if you're interested, you can check out that work. And at the moment, I'm trying to think about what it might mean to design with a sensibility of privacy. I want to think about this because I think we might have some impact of having prioritized the idea of access over everything else, over privacy in the design of digital technologies that we might now need to maybe not walk back from, but walk sideways from. And I wonder what it would mean to design educational spaces and technologies that have privacy at their heart. And there's really important and interesting work that's been done on privacy in higher education spaces as kind of managing exposures, recognizing the value of anonymity and seclusion, and lots of other things as well. And I've gone down a little rabbit hole of trying to understand what kind of tech futures people are proposing, because there's a bunch of interesting things at the moment. You know, smart glasses, and people have their smart speakers and stuff out on the street. And so this idea of bystander privacy has become really important in human-computer interaction. So people are thinking about possible futures for like microphones that can really easily be disabled, so you always know whether something is on or off. That people might be able to carry some kind of object that would be a machine-readable privacy marker, or maybe you could just have that embedded in your skin or your body in some way. And that maybe people can have apps on their phones where they could wander around and find out what stuff is watching them in any given room that they come into. And as you know, I'm interested in hospitality, so I also really like the title of this paper, which is "You Offer Privacy Like You Offer Tea." So this is the idea that if someone comes to your home as a guest, you could offer them privacy settings that would be appropriate to what it is that they want as a guest. Good title, right? So as part of my explorations of this idea, I had the opportunity to contribute a session to a workshop in early May that was designed and led by Dr. James Lamb on the future of learning spaces. And this was a really, really stimulating event that brought together an invited group of researchers from Edinburgh and beyond, people working on learning spaces, which is an area that James has done so much to build and develop in recent years. So I was invited to do a workshop that was a speculative storytelling experiment, sending people out into the EFI building to find an object or a space that spoke to them about possible privacy futures. And then they came back and wrote a short story, a bit of science fiction about that object and what it might be in the future. And there were some amazing, amazing stories. And if I had more time, I would tell you them all. But I'm just going to show one just now, which was by Dr. Ingrid Forsler, who has given me permission to share it, even though it's still really fresh. And yeah, it was nice of her to do that. So this is a story based on the kind of uncertainty about what's being recorded or not being recorded in these possible future learning spaces. And it is a story where students have taken to writing handwritten notes to each other and passing them around so that what they're saying isn't being picked up by the microphones that might or might not be off. And by the end of the day, she writes, there's a big pile of notes and a rough idea on the theme of the group assignment and division of labor. The last note reads, nothing compromising today, but I will take this home for disposal anyway, right? This is met with a nod from the other group members before sweeping all notes into a plastic bag. One is left on the floor. I think the recording is on today. I like this because it's a kind of unsanctioned hack and it's a crack in the arrangements of power that were clearly made in this future world. And as you know, I like it when the cracks come and let light in. And I think this is one example like that, where even in the most sort of, difficult spaces, some things can happen. And surveillance imaginaries, let me tell you, having done work on this for the last 5 or 6 years, tend to be very dystopian. We also found this in our Telling Data Stories project, but there is always the possibility of something misfiring, and the arrangements of power that produce spaces like this can go wrong in some really hopeful, possible ways. So I think we need to do some work on silence and seclusion and try to value them differently than we do. And I know, because I was here, that this building was made with the absolute best intentions about how we were going to make access more possible, more meaningful. And it is a meaningful goal. But I think we did miss something important as we did this work. And so I think this is the second dream for digital education that we now need to try to work a little bit differently with. So it's been a difficult few years, I would say. And I think my sort of natural, sunny optimism and perkiness is possibly shifting towards something a little bit grumpier and more stubborn. But it might be that this is also in my nature, as this photograph indicates. And so maybe I can use some of that sort of grumpiness that I appear to have acquired in the last few years to do something good with. And maybe it can be used as a way of activating strenuous hope that can maintain itself in the face of radical unknowability of our futures. And I really hope so. And I am committed to using all of the time that I have left, in life, to do everything that I can to try to keep futures open for other people to do stuff with. And thankfully, definitely not alone in this. And just in the last few months, even amidst all the weird difficulties that we are encountering, there are amazing collaborative global efforts unfolding that are giving us strategic and practical tools to move forward. And working with students on the MSc in Education Futures over the last 5 years, I have seen the amount of energy and sense of possibility and ideas that students are bringing to this question of what our education future should be. So I am hopeful. But also, a lot of us are really tired and stressed and worried. I think that's the condition right now in universities, in museums, in schools, and in communities. We are really tired, and we're worn down by visions of the future that don't look very wonderful, or maybe they don't include us at all. And in digital education, I think we want to keep doing this meaningful work that we really still believe in, but we worry about contributing to harmful tech arrangements that really seem impossible to avoid. And so we feel kind of ambivalent. And the nature of ambivalence is that it slows us down because we don't know how we feel or what we should do. And I think that is a good moment for speculative futures work. And my friend, Professor Akugo Amajulu, who's a sociologist of the activism of women of color in UK and Europe, has written about ambivalence as an opportunity to pluck us out of linear modes of thinking and resolution and consider what we might or might not do instead, how we might or might not act otherwise, through the time shift that this non-heroic feeling affords us. And I think if we have these moments of non-heroism and we have to slow down, then maybe we have a little small space that we can imagine otherwise in. And sometimes a little gift arrives to help us with this. And for me, that arrived a couple of weeks ago when I read this amazing paper by Udoewa, who was writing about impossible futures and what he described as an ethic of hopelessness. He said this was an ethic that doesn't depend on hope at all. It's inclusive of all relationships to hope. And it's an ethic that moves people to action not based on integrity, dignity, doing the right thing, right relationship with ancestors and descendants, and ultimately love. Not on hope for things that might not be within reach, might never be within reach. So I think we can build some new dreams that are different from the ones that have come before. And they can help us turn our imaginations to like the messy and glitchy futures that are maybe peering back at us through those cracks that I talked about earlier. Maybe we can make do with what's at our disposal and design and build for privacy and trust. Maybe we can reclaim effortfulness in education. Maybe we can serve as good hosts to unknowable others. And maybe it doesn't matter that much if we are super hopeful about our chances of seeing these dreams become a reality anytime soon, because we can do it anyway with dignity and love. Thank you.